Welcome to the Dragon's Library, your source for games, movies, shows, and more. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Dragon's Library. I'm horrible at scheduling things and Luca wasn't that interesting, so we're doing something else this week. So I originally planned on reviewing Luca, since I'm still not done with Subnautica, because I've had no time to do anything I want to do this week. And so while I was working today, I had Luca on in the background. I'm like, it's just not that great. I didn't really like it that much. I finished it. It just wasn't that fun. It was okay. It's, better than most anime movies, but Pixar, you've done better than this. I expect a higher caliber of movie from you, Pixar. So I went ahead and watched Godzilla Singular Point on Netflix instead while I was working on some stuff in Unreal Engine. And yeah, I actually really liked this, and I think it deserves to be talked about. So you know what? Screw it. It's my show, Godzilla time. Alright, so I've already talked about how much I love the Godzilla movies in my previous reviews for the Godzilla King of Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong. So I will spare you my love of the movies. I've watched some of the old Godzilla movies. I've watched maybe around 15 or somewhere around 15 of them. Not all of them by a long shot, but a decent chunk of them. I know the main points, some of his major villains, that kind of stuff, Mechagodzilla, Space Godzilla. But this movie is just, the show is just so, it's basically Steins Gate meets Godzilla. And I say that in the best way possible. For those of you who haven't watched Steins Gate, get on that, it's an amazing show. Anyway, Steins Gate is about time travel and inevitably, trying to repeat the past and inevitably everything working out the same, which is a bit different because this isn't really time travel in the same sense Steins Gate was, but talks about time and human relationship to it in a lot of the same metaphysical ways, if that makes sense. And it draws upon some scientific concepts like the idea of string theory and higher spatial dimensions and the idea of time as a fourth temporal dimension to our reality and stuff like that. I didn't really understand much more of that with a lot of the science because, I'm not sure if they've made up some of it for the movie, up for the show, or if it's based on some more other concepts that I'm just not aware of. I barely understand the strings theory thing, which is the idea that in order for physics to understand as we believe they work, we need 10 more spatial dimensions on top of our dimension or something like that, or we need 10 spatial dimensions instead of 3. So we need 7 dimensions, there are 3 we interact with and the 7 we can't interact with. Again, I'm not an expert. If I'm wrong on that, physicists, please do not hurt me. But the idea is they're basically just higher spatial dimensions. And it's an interesting idea, and they go through a lot of different things with this, and the entire series, okay, we'll get there. So, Godzilla Singular Point follows basically these 2 kids, Mei and Yoon. And one of them is sort of like a mechanic. It's set in the year 2030, and Yoon starts out, this is the first one we interact with, and he's basically just a mechanic who, works at this, robotics factory. They're finally, humans have finally gotten around to starting to develop giant robots to do manual labor and fighting for us. So, we're finally there. I guess they solved the energy problem because their batteries are really, really fucking good. So, good for them, good for us, we've solved the energy problem. So now it's time to make giant robots and more advanced stuff. It's a lot like the present day, except we just have slightly more advanced technology. The way you would look at, 2000, late 2000 would look at, right now, if that makes sense. We solved a few major problems, and now we're moving forward with technology. But we still have it's still very similar to the world you know today. And so it starts going into, basically there's this strange signal and electrical problems happening in this house that was by this eccentric, rich scientist from 60 years ago. And they figure out there's this message that's broadcasting. And it's this big string of codes and numbers and hidden messages, and you're like, oh, because they're going to unravel, so they're going to serious. Okay. And meanwhile, there's this, I think she's an intern, May. She's either working on a PhD or something like that. I don't remember the exact context. And so basically she's like a science assistant, an intern looking for positions, that kind of thing. And she, works part-time at this little station, gets called in to read over these results. And basically, she ends up getting caught up in the creation of these things called archetypes, which are basically, fourth dimensional objects that exist in the three-dimensional world and have unique properties like being able to bend time along the axis of time itself. Like, imagine if light wasn't just moved along a physical, but if we could, like, loop it backwards in time to, like, cause a cascade and eventually erupt into an explosion. Like that. There are some really weird demonstrations. It makes sense in the context from what I can understand, but, like, re-explaining it is not something I am equipped to do. So watch the series. It's actually really fun. They do a lot of interesting things. I'm not sure if the science is real or if, they just make it seem real enough. I didn't understand most of it, so I'm not even going to pretend to. The only thing I understood was the idea of, like, time looping around, but I still don't understand where the excess energy that caused the explosion comes from. I only got so far as, so it can loop around in a circle by being refracted to this material. But I don't understand how it caused an explosion in that one thing, and I don't think we're supposed to understand how it caused an explosion there. But they figure it out, so that's good for them. And I bet you're wondering, wait, I thought this was a Godzilla movie. It's like, oh, right, okay. So, shortly after all this weird stuff starts happening, monsters start appearing coated in, like, a red dust. At first, it's like one big giant pterodactyl, which is like the Rodan. It's basically just Rodan. It's a little miniature Rodan. A lot of the monsters in this series are actually a lot smaller than their Japanese counterparts in the movies, which is kind of interesting. And, it just kind of flaps around, lands near some people. They attack it because, it's a giant bird and it caused a water tower to fall over, but it's not really being hostile. Next, a bunch of Rodons, smaller, more agile ones come, and now they're trailing this red dust everywhere because there's just so many of them. So, we deal with them. They eventually die, believed to be a lack of the material in the oxygen. Then some other monsters start appearing. Some sea serpents, a big old, spiky koala monster. God, what was his name? He's based off a Godzilla monster. Come on. 1 second, let me look it up. It's on the tip of my tongue, I swear. David, you're wasting time. Anguirus. He's basically like an, ankylosaur, armored dinosaur kind of thing. But it can like predict the future, and its spikes can vibrate to deflect bullets. It's all really cool. I really like some of the concepts they play around with. The idea of, did it see its own death coming, and did it do it because it couldn't stop itself, or did it know its death was coming and still fight anyway, like an instinctive response? And I'm like, that's some really interesting questions about the nature of time. If we could actually calculate out what was going to happen in the future, what did our decisions mean anything, and how do our decisions, now that we know the future, affect the future? Was it always going to happen that way, or does the future account for the fact that we've seen the future? There's some very interesting time travel style questions that occur, despite there not actually being that much time travel itself going on in the show. And basically what happens is, these monsters keep, evolving and changing. At first, they're almost curious. They even mention that the ankylosaur didn't even realize that guns were dangerous until, bang, loud sound, somebody pointed this thing at it, and now it's hurt. And then it started by just deflecting, and it wasn't really attacking people. It was just kind of roaming about. There weren't really any deaths resulting from it. And the sea serpents were just kind of living their lives. Boats just got in the way sometimes. They didn't actively hunt people. They even mentioned from the earlier ones that they didn't seem to really have that large of a digestive tract, implying that they weren't designed to eat people, And it's the idea of, wait, was our violent response what's snapped them into this? At least that's what I got. The characters don't really think about that. They're more, these monsters are everywhere, and even if they're not being destructive. But we don't have time to really think of that because suddenly a larger monster comes on. It's like a giant sea serpent at first, but it starts growing into legs, going from like a tadpole to, a frog, basically. And then it starts shifting, and suddenly you realize, it's Godzilla! Godzilla's finally in this movie! And from there, it just starts going like almost a Shin Godzilla route where, Godzilla starts mutating outwards, growing bigger and larger and more destructive. And all the while, this unfolding mystery of the nature of these immensely powerful objects that could redefine physics as we know them. The strange looping song that keeps playing throughout the entire series that they discover in the basement. The scientist and all these places he went to and discovered, and how he learned about a material that, according to everything we know, we shouldn't have been able to make unless we already knew how to make it. But then it becomes like a chicken and egg problem. Philosophical and scientific inquiries are made. Ideas about, the nature of existence and how we come to be, what makes us, what defines us, and if we were always meant to be that way or raised. It's I kind of like it. I do. Some of the questions the show poses are genuinely fascinating. They're kind of things I've thought about a few times, but they're set up in such a way that it's just kind of an interesting take on Godzilla. And you know what? I'm not entirely sure it works. The ending's a bit underwhelming in my opinion. It's not the best. I still feel weird the robot was the solution. I don't really think that works, but I'm not sure it works entirely, but you know what? I do think the show itself is genuinely well made, and even if the ending wasn't entirely for me, the solution they gave anyway wasn't entirely I'm not sure that works, but the rest of the show is good enough, and the final finale was definitely a payoff. It has some good fight scenes when it wants to have them, and you know what? The monsters are really fun and interesting. They're nice takes on old Godzilla characters, and I think the show's worth seeing. So yeah. Anyway, before we get into massive spoiler talks, because again, what I've talked about is stuff it's just the general stuff that's gonna happen in the show. I just wanted to do it. Most of this stuff is gonna happen by episode 6, about halfway through. So before I actually go into the ending stuff, I'm going to talk about some of the other things. Really good voice acting. The dub is really good. That's what I listen to because I've listened to dub anime. I know all the other anime fans are saying sub forever, but I'm I like dub. Sorry. I like being able to listen to it in the background, not to pay full attention to it. So I can work on other stuff while I'm watching it. Don't get me wrong though, there were a few moments where I put down my stuff and I was oh, I have to just watch this. Just absorb this. But the rest of the show, yeah, really good. It has this really good haunting score at times, especially with that the song that keeps reappearing over and over again and turns out to have embedded codes and stuff in it, and I really liked it. You know what? And the main characters are kind of fascinating too. You have these group of engineers that are all working together, and they have this really cool scene in the first episode where he shows that he's this very analytical person that can use his factors to try and predict outcomes, and he's really really good at it by saying, well, there's these weather phenomena that have been causing decrease in local fishing populations, and so there's going to be a shortage in a few weeks. As a result, it's unlikely the restaurant we go to will be able to serve us fish because we always go in late, which means they're probably going to be out by the time we go there for lunch. So we're going to be going to this other place. But because the fish is going to be in a shortage at all, we'll probably have to eat something else. So I suggest we'll probably get this a week from now. And it was really interesting. And I'm oh, I like the logic he used. Because it's not that we get proven right. We actually never see if he was proven right by that. What happens is we get to see his thought process, the way he thinks about and takes in information and all these disparate factors and puts them together towards a conclusion. He even uses various things while he's talking about this to figure out there's a hidden passage and find out where the song's coming from. And it's really interesting. We basically get to see the way his mind works. It's almost like he and his friend are he's Sherlock Holmes and his friend is Watson, basically. Getting him to talk through his methodology. Yoon also has these conversations with May over a text chat that has some really cool payoff later in the series because there are some time travel implications. But, I like the way they describe the thought process of their characters. They, even if the science is, definitely at one point science, multiple points in the series, the science goes full on science fiction multiple times. But, there's some, real world basis, if that makes sense, in string theory and stuff like that. But even when it's doing that, it's showing us the method behind the madness, if that makes sense. It's showing us how these characters came to these conclusions in the world they're in. So, yeah. Alright, let's go into the spoiler talk. Okay, there's this really cool thing that happens with the series. And so, basically, they've been figured out figured out about like episode like 9 that you figured out that the song had an code embedded inside the song because it was actually different from the original variation of the song. So the static inside the code could be turned into static inside the song could be turned into a code. That code related to various times, dates, and times. And it was figured out that all of those dates and times were messages that were sent to him in his conversation with May. It was basically all of them were messages either sent to him or from him in his chat with May over the last few weeks. And so it turns into a message from the future. But no, it gets even more meta than that. You see, when they start looping the song, it actually turns out that the code was additionally referencing various pieces of data in his, both him and May have this AI, and they've both grown their own personalities because they're basically adaptive AI for the future. They're both really cute, by the way. I like them. They're fun. But basically, the code is sending back an update using the memory by referencing portions of the AI's memory. So when it was looped on end, it actually ended up updating him and rewriting him. But that's not the twist. See, the twist is that basically the machine they were using, this computer, uses the future to basically calculate things that we couldn't calculate. So what happens is it'll send in future and it'll do 2 outcomes. And the correct one will go, and then that one will send 2 outcomes, and 2 outcomes, and 2 outcomes. And then, when the answer is finally done, it'll send it back to our time. So, in our time, it's like a second has passed, but it's actually doing calculations over what must seem like years. What was actually equivalent of years of calculations. Which is really fascinating from like a science fiction perspective. It's a really fun idea. And May's AI ends up having to calculate the solution to the end of the world. Godzilla was going to cause a cascading reference. It's really complicated, but Godzilla is basically this connected 4th dimensional point, in addition to the computer itself, that's going to cause the cataclysm now in the universe. It'll grow larger and larger and eclipse and shatter the universe or something. So they've run out of time. They have no more time to calculate, even the small amount of time it needs to do the branching paths. So the AI takes a task that had failed years ago, that was still paused, loops back around to 60 years ago to the scientist that had started all this thing, and then feeds into the song, basically generates the song that they've been hearing this entire time, embedding in it a code that updates the AI, one of the 2 AI it was born from, one of the 2 AI, because they're both created from the same program, but they developed their own personalities due to personal files and tastes and stuff like that. And that AI then updates the other AI, and that means the AI is sort of like their child, mentally speaking, I guess, or from a data perspective. And has the solution to help, defeat Godzilla and save the world and destroy the point and undo all the damage. Basically by nullifying this 4th dimensional material that's been seeping into their world. And it's a really interesting idea because it means that this entire thing is a giant time loop. And I love it. Oh, it's really fascinating. Although we still never figure out how the scientists figured out, where the first point came from. Is this a part of the time loop? Or, again, I'm not sure the ending entirely holds up together. It's satisfying, but I'm not sure it entirely holds up together from a meta perspective, because even if they loop back around to the 60 years ago experiment, the scientists had already found the point and used it to create the computer, so the point already existed. So if it was not supposed to exist until we learned the information to create it, how did it happen? What caused all this? Now, maybe they'll answer us all in a season 2 or something like that. That would definitely be interesting. Maybe it'll be some kind of prequel, I don't know. But from a thematic perspective, I do think that the series was, cathartic. It had a nice, satisfying ending. And yeah, I think it was a fun series. Definitely try and do things differently. And, that's always a good idea. no series should ever be in trouble for trying to do something different. Even if it doesn't work, you try out something new, and hey, occasionally you get really good series out of that kind of methodology. So I would probably if I was like grading Godzilla Single Point, I would probably give it like a B minus, maybe a B, maybe a solid B. Like, I'm not sure it's amazing, but it definitely holds up pretty well. I like it. It was fun. So yeah. Okay, everybody. Well, that's been this week. I hope my ramblings didn't take too much out of you. Next week, what are we going to do? You know what? Next week, I'll do The Labyrinth of Drakes, a memoir by Lady Trent. You know, the next one in the Natural History of Dragons series. You know, get the series back on track after Godzilla, back to dragons, where it belongs. And then after that, we'll see how it goes. I'll see what I have up running. I have a few things that I could review about that time. We'll talk about it then. Alright. See you guys next time. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and thank you for listening to the Dragon's Library. Please, subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes. The Dragon's Library releases new episodes Tuesday and Friday each week, and you can follow us on Twitter at dragon_library2. If you want to suggest an episode topic, my email is in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for all your support.